Okay, great. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our final session for the quarter. Today we have Adam Warmoth joining us. He's the founder and CEO of a new defense tech company called Chariot Defense. Company is still in stealth, so we're getting an early peek at what he's been working on. So Chariot's been at the forefront of battlefield electrification, replacing the legacy fossil fuel generators that have traditionally been used. They've developed a lightweight, low signature battery system that's smaller, quieter, lighter, and more efficient, especially important for today's modern battlefield where there's demand for these power systems that can power everything from AI edge compute to sensors, directed energy. He was also previously Senior Director of Engineering at Anduril, as well as Senior Director and Head of Product at Archer. So he'll be interviewed by Paul Kwan. Paul led and drove Chariot's latest financing round. I'm glad to have invested in the company along with a couple other VCs in the audience here today. Paul is also a Hall of Fame investment banker turned venture capitalist. He leads the defense tech practice at General Catalyst, defense tech and global resilience practice. So Paul and Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us. And thanks for showing up on finals week and last day of the last class of the schedule. I think it's a real treat to have Adam here. Not only is he our first alumni and defense tech founder from Stanford to be on the show with us, but I think secondarily his journey is really compelling. Whether it was in school as a student athlete, his journey after school, working at big and emerging industrial tech, autonomous tech companies, defense tech, and then his journey into Chariot, his own company. So compared to other talks, we're gonna do a little more of the background here because I think it's super helpful for you to hear that story. A lot of lessons to learn about that before he even began his own founder journey. So really the first question for me was, I studied a lot at school here. I didn't really get much done, but like you juggled student athlete life. How'd you do that back in the day?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to really like compartmentalization and just being able to like put all of your focus into one thing, even when there are 100 other fires. And I think that has served well into entrepreneurship as well. I think Michelle maybe recently had a tweet around one of the best attributes of startup founders is actually the ability to like have 10 different fires going on and pick one and just fight that and realize that other ones are going to burn. I think that related to being a student athlete here, studying engineering physics, undergraduate, co-terming in mechanical engineering, and playing varsity water polo as a captain of the varsity water polo team. And to do that, right, like when you're in practice, right, when you're in the game, you can't be thinking about that problem set that's due the next day that you've only made it halfway through. So yeah, I think like prioritization, but really kind of compartmentalization and the ability to focus on one thing even when there's 10 other fires going on, and realizing that you're gonna have to do your best and you have to focus, you have to pick where you're gonna put your time.
That's awesome. And then coming out of school, you had job offers at other companies, but there's something you really wanted to work on, and you kind of like cold called this one thing. Talk about that, and how did you know? But then again, the persistence to get that job out of school.
Yeah, so I was coming out of school in 2015, 2017, I guess, when I finally graduated with the co-term. In the Bay Area, there wasn't like still a lot of there wasn't a lot of defense tech startups at the time, right? Even like it was kind of peak of the SaaS and the social media and the consumer wave. And so I knew that I actually had the fortunate opportunity to work in a lab here at Stanford. Professor Alon Crow, who was kind of the founder of the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, had left. He was a teacher, had left to go found that company, Z Aero, and then came back to teaching. Ended up in his lab that summer, and realized that I was kind of on the ground floor of something pretty cool and something pretty interesting, and knew that that's what I wanted to spend my career on. There weren't a lot of companies doing that at the time. It was still very much, secret Larry Page-funded labs in Mountain View and researchers. But Uber had stood up this new Uber Elevate division that I read about. Flew myself out to their conference in Dallas. I think I was probably one of the only, if not the only, undergraduate student there. And bought a flight, bought a hotel, and was like, hey, can you give me a job? And they're like, we're 3 people right now. We're not hiring. But decided to like turn down a bunch of other job offers and say like, I'm going to ride this out. Like this is something new and something compelling. So
did you close it at the conference, or you had to like?
Oh no, I emailed them for like 3 more months after that. and constantly bothering them and pestering them, and then finally they gave in.
That's awesome.
So yeah, definitely, I think the lesson there, just if you have something where you see an opportunity, something you're really passionate about, take that extra time and yeah.
And then Uber, then next phase, starting to get a defense tech. Talk about that shift, and then we'll do some of the war stories and some of the deployment stories there. But let's talk about that.
Yeah, so got to kind of experience a real kind of 0 to 1 opportunity at Uber. We launched Uber Copter in New York as this kind of proxy service where we actually got to go run a business day to day, flying people in and out of the airport. So it was a really cool experience. But then heard about Anduril through, I think it was a Wired article in like 2019 when they like finally kind of like came.
So you get a lot of job tips from just reading magazines, man.
I read about. The Uber Elevate thing. I think I read about on that. I think it was recorded. I effing love science like thing. Like when that was like happening. So yeah, just like reading. Staying on top of the news is how you can kind of find out a lot about a lot of these opportunities. So yeah, was really excited about what Anduril was doing. Thought they had a really unique combination of really cool technology and a really innovative business model. And that's something that I've kind of tried to bring into everything that I've done since then. It's pretty rare to find that, right? You get a lot of companies that are like very business focused, but they're just like, well, we're gonna go sell something and we're gonna throw it over the fence. We're gonna just give a spec to some engineers and have them build it. You get other companies that fall in love with the technology, right? These technologists who they just build what they're passionate about and then they throw it over the fence to the sales team and say, hey, go sell this. And what Anduril had was a real blend of great business and great technology. And that was really inspiring for me getting to be there. And yeah, learned some lessons along the way.
So we had Trey Stevens, kind of the first class we did here, 18 months ago. Trey was our first speaker and talked about how amazing the journey was at Anduril, how easy it was. So let's talk about like it wasn't.
Right.
You were actually the first product manager for the first program. So talk about, and maybe actually step back, like how is being a product manager at Anduril different than at your normal tech company? Maybe first level set there and then talk about the chaos of getting that first product.
Totally, yeah. And so I'll get into this a little more later as we get into this eight-legged stool concept, but it's like there's selling to the government versus being like a product manager selling to the government is very different than selling to consumers, right? With Apple, right, Steve Jobs was able to just be this product genius and just see this vision and like understand the consumer and understand what they wanted better than they knew what they wanted and build that and like sell that to them. And that was enough, right? Doing product at a company like Anduril, your customer is split across a bunch of different organizations where some of them have buying authority, some are writing requirements, some are actually using the equipment. All those people have different demands, but all of them are important in terms of actually running a successful program. And so it evolved kind of from like product management into really program management, where you have to think about kind of the growth alongside the product development. One of the hardest decisions I had to make there early on was to basically kill a program. So if you search for Anduril dust online, you'll actually see a picture of this, but it's no longer on their website. Where I had to kill a program at Anduril because the technology was developing, but the customer wasn't developing alongside it. And so one of Anduril's great things is they're taking bets before there's a customer requirement, right before there's a funded program. And that's really in the DNA of what's made them successful, how to like compete against the primes. And that's a great thing, but at some point that kind of customer side has to line up with the technology side. And so they made an early investment in a product, went out and built it, kind of discovered, did some early discovery, did some early prototyping, but kind of along the way realized that product market fit wasn't quite there in terms of the customer not only kind of fitting that need, but also like, hey, is there program dollars for this in the budget, right? Have you found that internal champion who's going to be able to push this all the way through? Is there a requirement? Is there funding in the future year defense plan? And so kind of all that customer development that has to happen alongside the product development just wasn't as maturing as quickly.
This is like a critical point. This gets back to obviously Steve and Hacking for Defense and Joe, but like most of the defense tech companies we see out there, they get funded, they have a good idea, and they just keep pushing. And the fact that you guys were able to say, hey, listen, this is not working, right? And actually pull back shows a level of kind of discipline, intentionality that's very, very different than what you see there. How did that then, we'll jump ahead a little bit, inform some of the things we liked most about you when we met, which is like this speed of iteration, this cycle time for your new company. We're jumping ahead a little bit here. How did that experience there teach you about building your own company better?
Yeah, I think it really emphasized the importance of those regular kind of the contact with reality, where you can't just go build in a vacuum for 2 years and then show up with a thing and say, okay, cool, I built this thing. Do you like it? One is there's just no amount of research that you can do that will really tell you like what it's like to operate that equipment with all of the legacy equipment like in that environment. Again, kind of going back to the delta from kind of a Steve Jobs, right? Steve Jobs could imagine and experience and understand every use case basically nearly that his consumers would use, right, that device in. With DoD, that's not possible. You have to get the equipment into their hands and actually get out into these exercises and into these test events in the field to really learn the true product requirements. There's no amount of research you can do in your office that will give you that answer. And so yeah, that kind of quick contact with reality, get it out there, see what works, see what doesn't work, learn from it, and setting the expectations along the way to build that relationship with the customer. And that's kind of a key piece of doing this well in the defense space, because this kind of concept of rapid iteration is obviously not something we invented, but a key piece of doing it well in defense is making sure that you build that customer champion, because that customer champion isn't kind of a throwaway customer, right? If you're testing a consumer app, you go to one person, they don't like it, great, you can never sell to that person again, and it doesn't matter. And in DoD, that person is going to be that person, and they're going to continue to be that person, and they talk to everyone else you care about. And so kind of going into those test events, going into those exercises, clearly setting expectations. Here's what our system can do, here's what it can't do. And making sure that you do all that kind of work up front is really critical, because you have one customer ultimately. They all talk to each other, and you have one reputation in this business, and that really matters. So
we'll come back to the special speech you were asked to give at Anduril about being a product manager. But before we do that, I mean, just like, whether it was for the counter-intrusion product or counter-UAS, like what are some crazy stories of like going out for a demo and the thing doesn't work, or like, just some crazy other situations there, again, early days of Anduril, like what were those like?
Yeah, so I mean, there's times when, we get a call in the middle of the night, our CEO, so I get a call from our CEO because our CEO had gotten a call from this, SOCOM Sergeant Major who said, hey, your equipment's not working. And what we had to do was we had to kind of, okay, now how do we actually like figure out what actually happened there, right? And kind of peel back the layers of truth. And in certain places, we kind of found in kind of some of those cases, the equipment was actually working, it just hadn't been communicated properly what the equipment was capable of and what it wasn't capable of. So for things like counter-UAS, there's just physical limitations of sensors, right? A sensor like a radar has a certain search cone, and anything outside of that search cone, whether it's above or below or beyond the range, just isn't going to be detected. And so kind of explaining the physics of that, right, can seem like you're getting too much in the weeds, can seem like you're kind of getting too in the details, but ultimately, these operators, are designed, their core skill set is taking and managing risk. The core just like function of warfighting is constantly managing risk, and not expecting everything to be perfect. And so if you can kind of do that communication up front, be way more transparent than you think you should be on this is what the system can do, this is what it can't do. But when you don't do that, now that's, hey, this system doesn't work. And once you are in that state of mind, again, your CEO is getting a call in the middle of the night, and now anything you say is an excuse. And really with the military especially, and for good reason, right? They have been sold a lot of snake oil by a lot of different companies. They have been given equipment that wasn't tested and built with warfighter feedback, that got to the field and just didn't meet their need. And so for good reason, they're skeptical, right? And so if you're already in kind of excuse mode, it's already too late.
This is actually a really huge point. We'll come to the speech in a second, but like the biggest thing we learned when we talk to defense tech CEOs is they really wish their teams understand that whatever happens when you're selling to the DoD or the government, whatever goes wrong, it's basically your fault. In fact, it's always your fault. It doesn't even matter what the customer or the DoD says. It's just you have to shoulder that responsibility, and that's just sort of the reality. And so let's get to this this thing where you were asked to speak to all the other product managers and Anduril about how to be a great product manager, this is probably worth the price of admission for today's talk. If you ever go work in a product management role, or certainly in defense tech or industrial tech, what did you talk about in this little speech to the team at Anduril?
Yeah, so I gave a talk to the other program managers, kind of made as that kind of first product program manager at Anduril, growing the counter intrusion business unit from kind of very pilot stage into a mature business line, and then did the same for the counter U.S. air defense, which was kind of that next.
These are the first two major programs of record at Anduril, by the way. The whole two that unlocked Anduril that became the success it was, just to give you some hype.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I always I don't deserve all the credit for building those programs from a 0 to 1, but when I took those programs over, they were in kind of this pilot stage of, hey, we just proved this concept with kind of one customer, now we need to build this into a business. And there were a lot of other programs at Anduril in those early stages where they're placing bets, they're finding that early champion, they're getting their product out into the field with one customer in a kind of contained environment, and getting ready to make that transition into a kind of sustainable business operation. And so, yeah, Brian asked me to give a talk to their program managers and talked about a number of lessons learned from that experience. One of those big ones was expectation management is the key, and relayed those same stories around getting called and yelled at, right, by those operators saying your equipment's not working, and it's because we hadn't done the job up front of setting those expectations. There were times we'd go to a test event, and that the account manager for that customer had a really good relationship with that customer, and they said, hey, they want to do some tests that are beyond what we scoped out for the initial test, but don't worry, right? I trust this person. They just want to see what happens, and then that goes, and they do have a good relationship with that person, and that person says, yeah, that's fine, but that gets written into a test report, and it says, it failed this test, right? Even though we knew it was going to fail that test, even though that wasn't even part of the initial test plan. And so just managing kind of the process, managing expectations, being very clear about the capabilities and limitations of the system was one of the big things I talked about. Another one was sweat the details. I don't know if some of you guys saw this kind of most recent like founder mode from the kind of most recent Brian Chesky, Airbnb founder. For me, it was really about the way I kind of described it was you have to micromanage the outputs, but not the inputs. And that's kind of this delicate balance of growing a company, right? Is you have to start to delegate more. You have to start to empower your team. And I think that's all really important. You can't micromanage the inputs of your company, but you do have to be the person kind of holding the bar on quality and on what's actually getting delivered to the customer. So that was another one of those lessons I imparted.
So then you decided, hey, let me go do my own thing.
Yep.
So talk about that journey to becoming, again, from the big companies to this founder journey. Kind of what was that driving force?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd gotten the opportunity to do kind of some 0 to 1 type opportunity at Uber Elevate. Got to go from an idea that we pitched to Dara all the way to launching a product and operating a service in New York for hundreds of customers a day. That was always kind of meant as a limited opportunity though, right? It was proving out this business model, but really the plan was, hey, we're going to wait for these eVTOLs before we really scale this business. So got to do the 0 to 1 there. It was a great experience, learned from great entrepreneurs at Uber who'd kind of taken some of I joined actually between CEOs at Uber, so got to learn from some of the best of kind of the Travis era and the Dara era in terms of really how to build disruptive companies. And then at Anduril got to scale those two programs, right? So take those from kind of a 1 to an N and really build those into massive sustainable businesses. But really kind of wanted to bring all those skills together into an opportunity to do that kind of the full Monty on it. And so was really inspired also then by that was like I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and then I was struck kind of by inspiration on this idea for Chariot that really then was like now's the time.
Yeah, and so the idea is basically...
Yeah, so the idea kind of brings together both industries I've worked in. So it brings together a problem that I saw at Anduril, where we were constantly constrained by power as we tried to field all these new autonomous systems, robotic systems, electronic warfare, command and compute. We were fielding counter U.S. equipment for SOCOM, and we had this like great low signature passive sensing system that had the ability to go active when it went to defeat. The problem was with existing power generation systems, you have to size your power to your peak load and your peak draw, and it has to be either on or off. Like these big generators are big and they're basically binary. And so this led to big problems for us. With mobility challenges of now you need a 1,500 pound generator, and now that 1,500 pound generator needs its own trailer, and now that trailer needs a truck. And when you're doing air assault type movements or expeditionary operations, that's a huge limitation on your mobility. Signature management challenges. That generator generates a big thermal signature, a big acoustic signature that creates a targetable signature that you have this passive sensing system with no RF signature, but it still has that, right? Okay, you're going to light up like a Christmas tree, and if there's a thermal camera anywhere in the area.
You got the super stealth autonomous system attached
Right.
to this gigantic generator you can hear from miles away, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, or see.
Exactly, yep. And so kind of what I saw was like converging problems. And we hadn't really faced them yet, but I kind of saw what was coming. And it was because in counterinsurgency type warfare, we were operating from fixed bases, right, where you're going out for 12 hours and coming back to the base. So you don't have these contested logistics problems. You don't have the signature management problems, right? Conventional US Army forces haven't looked up in like 30 years, right? And so you had this kind of problem that was kind of under the surface, but it hadn't become apparent because of the way that we were fighting. And then what we saw in Ukraine was obviously that's changing. Signature management matters, contested logistics matters, reduced reliance on resupply, more distributed, more mobile. So that's happening at the same time that the demand for power at the edge is increasing. You need more organic sensing, edge compute capabilities. You can't rely on this like big bubble of air defense to protect you anymore. And you see this in Ukraine, right, where small UAS are striking targets 4,000 kilometers beyond the FLOT. So you can't really rely on these theater level strategic assets. So the demand for power at the edge is growing, and at the same time as the ability to deliver power at the edge is being greatly reduced. So that problem was really something I saw and what inspired me to start the company. And then that kind of combined with the technology side that I saw, and kind of coming back to that idea of you need a great business and a great technology. And coming from the electric aircraft industry, saw how advanced these battery systems, lithium-ion batteries, silicon carbide power electronics. There's been massive material science breakthroughs in the past 20 years, driven by Tesla and Lucid and Rivian and now Archer and Joby, really pushing what's possible in terms of electric power, power distribution, power storage. So saw the opportunity to take a great commercial technology and apply it against this warfighting problem, the same way Palantir did with cloud software, right? Palantir didn't invent cloud software or relational databases, but they were the first ones really to apply that to DoD. Anduril didn't invent computer vision, right? Robotics, machine learning, but they were the first ones to really bring that to DoD. We're trying to do the same with the electric vehicle breakthrough.
I mean, for us, when we first started talking to Adam, a lot of people in defense tech investing focused on, the drones or the kinetic systems or AI or things that are like little sector. But at the same time, you're like, what's going to power all that? Mm-hmm. Like, we're going to get the power to do all this stuff. And then the second question you asked, like, well, how big could that market be? Maybe just talk about, like, even just for certain classes of new vehicles for the Army, just how many and just how big that could be, just as a size.
Yeah, and so I just got back from a month in Louisiana at the Army's Joint Readiness Training Center, and got to see firsthand kind of this how the Army's fighting in this new Army Transformation Initiative, and they're fighting basically out of vehicles. So they're fighting in much smaller form factors, much smaller footprint, reduced staff, but ultimately, the key way that they're moving around the battlefield is with vehicles. And we were under tents where they have certain equipment that only runs off the truck's battery. It's like hardwired in 24 volts into the truck's battery. So the only way they can keep that system powered is by running the truck. But they're backing these trucks up into these tents to run these command posts. And so they're literally idling trucks, and we're standing in there like getting carbon monoxide because that's the only way they have to deliver power today is idling trucks. They're not bringing these big generators anymore because they don't have the mobility footprint. The signature management's too hard. The resupply on the fuel for those, they just don't have those resupply assets. So yeah, they're fighting out of vehicles, and the vehicles just really aren't designed to power all the new equipment that's being put onto them in terms of edge compute stacks, sensors. And so there's 200,000 vehicles in the Army's tactical wheeled vehicle fleet. So that's just one service, and that's just wheeled vehicles. That's not the combat vehicles. And so there's an opportunity to effectively hybridize every one of those vehicles, and then getting into ground combat, getting into the other services, getting international. And so you kind of look at the picks and shovels models of what can make a great company. We kind of see power as the picks and shovels of defense.
Yeah. No, it's actually pretty huge when you think about it from a market size. The other thing that we obviously we didn't notice at the time, but after we invested was like speed of iteration matters. So for early stage, right, your runway, your time to market is critical, right? Because you have a certain amount of money, you've got to spend it. Your speed of execution, the first, call it 3 to 9 months we thought was good. I don't know if you're happy with it, but talk about that and what did you guys do well to get stuff into the hands of warfighters as demos pretty quickly, even right after we and others invested.
Yeah. So first day of our first exercise in Camp Roberts was 3 months after the first check into the company. JRTC kicked off 6 months after the first check into the company. And we've been able to do that by, part of it is leveraging advanced commercial technology, right? So not having to go reinvent the things that we don't need to reinvent. That's kind of that concept around these technologists that, maybe fall in love with technology and spend 2 years in a room building. We realized we can make an impact on this and we can go get feedback on this by bringing in commercial tech, combining it where it makes sense, where it's most critical for us to invest. That's what let us kind of build systems quickly and actually get something out in the battlefield. We maybe kind of bucked the trend from a hiring perspective as well, right? There was the Keith Boy interview around don't hire anyone over 30 for a startup. For us, we're doing high voltage power systems. And so, right, we are trying to bring in, fresh talent, but we're also hiring people who've built systems like this,
Even the way like you picked where to put the office, that's another question we asked, like just the intention, like why did you pick that? I know the answer, but why did you pick the office where it was?
Yeah, and all the right, the Gundo, Elson Gundo's, right, kind of the big defense tech hub right now. For us, the key talent is really coming out of places like Tesla, places like Rivian, Lucid, Archer, Joby, Apple, Cruise, Waymo, right? And if you actually draw like basically those on a map and you pick the centroid, you're in San Bruno, California. So that's where we put our headquarters. The other nice thing is we're 5 minutes from SFO, so when congressional delegations come through and they have 2 hours to kill before their flight, right? We can say, hey, why don't you stop by the office, right? So.
Why that's important, having congressional visitors, just for the audience.
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned before this kind of 8-legged stool of like, very different from business to consumer. There's 8 different people you have to keep happy. A big one of those is Congress because they hold the purse strings, right? So they're the appropriators. All defense funding is approved by Congress. We have a civilian-led military, right, where the Secretary of Defense and the different secretaries of services are civilians. And ultimately, they get their authorities to spend money to procure, to operate from Congress. And so, yeah, we've invested a lot in those relationships and being kind of located in a nice place where they come do their, Silicon Valley innovation tours. We're an easy stop for them. So from a talent perspective, and from a kind of strategic perspective.
We've got the Jeep Gladiator in the front yard.
Exactly. Yeah. Part of the factory is the product is another kind of term that you've heard recently, and so that's another thing is for DoD, appearance matters. You do have to show them that this is, hey, we are a reliable company that can be counted on. That's also part of why it's so important getting out to these exercises early on, with real products and real capabilities to show like, hey, we're not just people with a PowerPoint, right? We've got a real facility. As you get into bigger programs, they look for things like AS9100 certifications. They look for supply chain risk. So we've invested a lot in kind of business operations and production systems and manufacturing execution systems ahead of where another startup, might have in a different market, because that's actually part of your sales process is showing the government that you are ready to deliver. Because if they're gonna bet on you, they need to know that you will.
The other thing is you guys get out there on bases and on training exercises, right? So talk about, just getting, in the dirt out there on these bases and exercises to like show the products. That's like the less glamorous side, but talk about that.
Yeah. So, I didn't necessarily think I was gonna be spending 3 weeks living out of a Hampton Inn in Leesville, Louisiana, but that's what it takes, right? Is part of it is for that credibility, right? To show that you're going after this market. You're serious about it. Part of it, again, is those lessons you can only learn there. That there's no textbook on, especially with how fast things are changing in DoD today. I've been working in defense not as long as a lot of the people in the room, but since 2020, And there's been a lot of talk about change, and we are really seeing it now with some of these big program cancellations, with the new force structures. And so there's literally not a textbook you can read. And actually, if you go talk to people who've been out of the military, they might even have the wrong impression if they're going to overfit on their past experience. And so, like, yeah, actually getting out there, seeing how they're fighting, seeing what legacy equipment you need to integrate with. The worst thing you can do is be like, hey, I've got this system and it's great if you completely change the way that you're operating, right? That's a big bet to make and a big ask. And so if you want to make sure your system works in the way they fight today, fits into their doctrine, fits into their training, fits into their fielding, works with legacy equipment, really the only way to do that is get out to these bases, get out to these exercises.
How did you just learn along the way? I mean, even coming out of school, did various jobs, obviously entrepreneurship, but did you have mentors? Did you kind of just figure it all on your own? Like, how did you learn all these steps along this journey, in your mind?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to work with some great mentors along the way, bosses at Uber, like Nikhil, who's then also my boss at Archer, people at Anduril, Zach Wyatt, Lindsay Trice, Scott Sanders, Gokul. So had great mentors at the very tactical level, who've invested in me. Even from the very early days of Uber, where I was given way more responsibility than I probably should have been, to actually go launch this product in New York as someone less than a year into my career.
Did you ever fly?
Yeah. So I haven't flown in the eVTOL yet. So I flew in that helicopter all the time. Yeah. Again, part of kind of the dog fooding of the experience. That wasn't so hard to. I was a little, flying in a helicopter, between downtown JFK is a little nicer than the 3 weeks in Leesville. But yeah, so found people who wanted to invest in me. Even getting into product management, I didn't know in college that I wanted to be a product manager. I started at Uber as an engineer, and then really just looked at what is the way that I can have the biggest impact for the company, and just volunteered for those things. And there's it's in a fast-growing startup. There's no shortage of space, basically, of jobs that aren't being done. Talking about those 10 fires, that leader is going to be picking one of those fires. They're going to have 9 other that they're ignoring. And you have to do during your 9 to 5, do the work to help them put their top priority out. But there's a lot of white space, to pick up that next fire that's not being addressed. By doing that, you encourage and invite kind of mentorship by people who see that initiative and then want to help you.
Okay. And then the last question for me, and then we can take questions from the audience. You've obviously been at Uber, obviously iconic company, Archer, which is doing amazingly well actually, the last couple of years executing in Anduril. When you build Chariot, what do you think you want the culture of Chariot to be like? What are the best and worst things from other companies? What do you want the culture to be, in a year or two from now?
Yeah. So I'll come back to some of those. I talked about 5 things I talked about in that speech to program managers. Talked about 2 of them: the expectation management and the sweating the details. The other ones were really culture focused around. One was assume positive intent, and you have to work really hard to make that a value at your company.
You would explain why in the business world that's not always the case, just for people that haven't worked as much.
Exactly. So if you don't set the right company culture, where self-serving behavior or kind of political behavior gets you ahead, which in a lot of companies unfortunately it does, then now you've lost the ability to assume positive intent, and now you can no longer kind of trust that the person kind of working with you is aligned to your best interest and the best interest of the company. And so it's like small things that can snowball, and then once you lose that assumption, and once you lose that kind of core truth, that everyone is kind of working against the right incentives, and then that's working towards the right outcome, basically a lot of other things break down. And so that was a big thing that I'm trying to build at Chariot is we want to incentivize and reward the right behavior, the behavior that serves the company, right, and not serves the self. And if you do that, then a lot of other, then you can ensue positive intent, then you can move faster, then you can do like blameless interrogation of when something goes wrong, right? And you can say, okay, let's investigate this, not to figure out who to point the finger at, but how we can get better. So that's a big piece of what I'm trying to build into the character of Chariot. Yeah.
Amazing.
You know, what you just heard is probably the best example of a startup CEO in Silicon Valley, right? Apprenticed at some companies, you know, learning some things, but actually, not that you just learn it, he's able to articulate it. And I think the ability to articulate those lessons, the ability to actually then take them and attract people, attract money, and attract customers is what Steve Jobs called the reality distortion field. But actually, in this case, it's not just a reality distortion field, it's actually creating your own reality. And by the way, for those of you who don't think that batteries are important, let me tell you a story from Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, there used to be bases, remote bases in hilltops that ran off of generators, you know, to charge their equipment and to run all the other things they needed to keep that base alive. Keep the generators powered, they needed to run fuel trucks down a convoy. And because those roads sometimes had IEDs and insurgents, that had to be like an armed convoy. And people's lives sometimes got lost. But what people forgot is that fuel had to be flown in by C-17s. And so now you had this entire supply chain just to keep a generator running on a hilltop somewhere in Afghanistan. And the minute someone said, perhaps we ought to use solar arrays and batteries, that it wasn't just they were using solar arrays and batteries. Now all of a sudden lives, fuel, people, aircraft, etc., all kind of changed. And I think this is a sample of, it's not about batteries and trucks. It's in fact about that entire supply chain. It's about the signature for overhead things that could see command posts, because when you see heat, when you see other things, when you see trucks all pointing to shoot at me, I'm important, you could just change the calculus in the game. And I just want to summarize that while this is the real deal and the real package, it's dependent on a customer, right? And a customer historically has not been friendly to startups. But that's changed in the last couple of years, and even more so this January. All of a sudden, there's a mandate to buy commercial. And that's a really big opportunity for any of you who are thinking about the defense business. This is the time to do it. It's not just sell to SOCOM and the Special Forces, but literally this morning, the Secretary of Navy said, same with the Navy now, they're just going to buy commercial first. And of course, all their acquisition people are trying to look up where is Silicon Valley. So opportunity. But Adam, thank you. I think this was like just the classic canonical case of like how to do it right. We're looking forward to seeing your IPO.